Give me a little intro there, Gomer.
There's no turning back now.
Let's put on the show.
You unlock this door with the key of imagination. Beyond it is another dimension. A dimension of sound. A dimension of sight. A dimension of mind. You're moving into a land of both shadow and substance, of things and ideas. You've just crossed over into...
Episode number 95 of the Station 71 podcast. My name is Mario, and this week I'm joined by my co-hosts,
Brian.
And Kirsten.
So, we've got some interesting news this week to talk about, guys. I'm kind of actually excited about this first one because it's pretty controversial. Looks like Disney has released a new midday magic ticket that starts at 12 p.m. and you have to purchase two of these, 2 or 4 day two to 4 day increments, from now between December 15th, 2019. Looks like this is aimed more at the people that are looking for a late start to their day.
This seems like it's right up Beth's alley.
Yeah, I was just thinking that.
I think it's great for the day you get there and possibly another day, I guess, especially if you have not kids because they're up early, but I don't know. I wish they would do it for one day so you could do it the day you arrive if you're somebody who flies in early, but, you know.
Yeah, at first, this didn't really grab me very much just because I know that I wouldn't use it the way that I normally go to the parks. But now that I really think about it, there are a lot of people that like to get later starts, and this is a pretty significant cost reduction on a full day ticket. So I think it'll be pretty popular.
I also think for people who stay on property, it'll help them, like, it might reduce crowds in the morning, you know, which is good if you are somebody who gets an early start.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how I feel about this. Like you said, there definitely is an audience for it, and it's not me. So I'm kind of on that, like, I don't know. I don't like the idea of this because it just feels very bizarre. It is definitely a cheaper option to doing the parks, and I think that that's good. And I think it's good that Disney is trying to find a way to draw in some more attendance at maybe a time where the parks have slowed down a little bit, because I think we've kind of talked about this before, that like a lot of times, you know, we hit the parks early, some of us will go back in the afternoon, take that midday break, and that seems to be like a popular thing a lot of people are doing. Like maybe this was in response to something like that, I don't know. But with all of these Disney things, I try to wonder like what pushed them to do this and where their audience is that they're trying to target. So
Well, I feel like I've definitely heard about it for other theme parks doing like a half day or a later entry, and like the Florida residents have always had that later entry pass, haven't they? Or is that just to Epcot or something?
They do it they have the Epcot after 4-1, but I mean, I feel like that's mainly just for people to go eat dinner at Epcot. Though I noticed in this article they said that these were offered to convention guests before, and now they're just kind of bringing them out to the public. And I definitely see where convention guests would take advantage of this.
yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And they do this all the time where they roll out these different tickets. We literally just talked about a couple months ago where they had the ticket where they would plan the fast passes for you, and that's not available anymore.
Yeah.
Like there's things like this all the time, and I think this is just their way of like testing something new. But like I said, I always kind of wonder like what they're trying to poke at, what market they're trying to get to with it.
Yeah. I'll tell you one thing. I feel bad for any of the cast members that are working like guest relations or the phone lines when you call in to buy tickets, because this has become so confusing with all these different annual pass options, single multi-day tickets, extra magic hours, extra magic hours. Like, I don't know. I feel like they have to put up with so much crap now when people are calling in, getting confused at all the different options available.
I told the story about the guy who showed up and had tickets for Disneyland, right?
Oh boy.
I
Really?
think, I think you told that in private.
Oh, okay, yeah. When I was working there, I remembered because I was just watching the show The Middle, like reruns the other day, the one where they go to Disney World and they have tickets to Disneyland instead of Disney World, and I was like, that really happens. Like that happened to me. Yes, the guy showed up and he had printed off his little. I don't know if they still do it this way. You printed off your little paper with a USB code, and then we would scan it and like give you an actual ticket, which was the little card at that time. And yeah, they were for Disneyland, and I must have been tired that day because I just started giggling, and I had to get somebody else come and talk to him because I could not stop laughing. Like I was just dying, and I felt so bad because I felt really bad for him, but I could not stop laughing. Like,
what came of that? Did they allow him to like credit it over to Disney World tickets?
they sent him to guest relations, but I would assume they would probably do something like that. I mean, make him pay the difference or something. I don't know. I don't really know how interconnected they are. That only happened to me once, but I would think they would have done something.
I couldn't imagine driving all that way and winding up on literally the other side of the country from where you're supposed to be.
But really, people have no idea, like at work, because people will find out, like, oh, you like Disney, and they're like, Disney, which one's in Florida? And like, a lot of people just don't know, I mean,
Yeah.
I guess in Florida they do, but Mario, do you ever run into that where people at work or, they're like, which one is in Florida? Like, people say
All
that
the
to me all the
time.
time.
Or like my favorite thing is when people are like, "Oh, you're going to Disneyland again?" And I'm like, "No, actually, I've never been to Disneyland."
Like, I think we forget, just because we're so involved, like how little so many people know about it. They really just don't have a clue.
Yeah, that's really true. Kind of routing it back a little bit to the ticket thing. I was reading this article further down, and they make a very interesting point that there may be like deeper implications for the motivations behind the midday ticket, and that would be one, redistributing crowds to midday, like I said, and then also trying to lure in guests that have been quote unquote priced out of the parks. And they also bring up the interesting point that, and this is the thing that I've been kind of hating that the internet has been talking about, that a lot of people are saying that Galaxy's Edge and Disneyland didn't draw in the crowd that it wanted them to draw in. So I think maybe they're looking at like the losses for that and saying, oh yeah, like we need a way to bring in more people to the parks, which that's a whole nother topic for a whole nother day.
Yeah, which I am amazed that it's been so quiet there. Like, I don't know.
Well, the problem there is that that's the annual pass holder park, and their annual pass holders are totally blocked out. So there's not really much that they can do there.
That'll do it.
I think that they kind of learned a little bit with that, like especially with them doing AP previews now for Galaxy's Edge, and then like I think Walt Disney World's is going to be probably a lot better of a reception, just because this is the park that people go to for stuff like that.
Right.
And the other point that they bring up too is that people have probably been shifting their trips around to avoid Galaxy's Edge or get closer to Galaxy's Edge and all that other fun stuff.
Yeah. Well, I
So-
thought, like, I wonder if a lot of people are like, oh, it's going to be so crowded, I'm not even going to try to go, because, like, for me, definitely in January, I'm not planning on that being a must-do. I'm like, if it happens, great. If it's still too crowded, like, I'm just going to sit it out.
I know people that have purposely moved their trip back because they don't want to be near Galaxy's Edge. So, anyway, Brian, I've cut you off twice now. I'm
No,
sorry.
I was just going to agree with you. I think that, the biggest thing is that from like obviously people in California that are gonna want to do this are gonna go to Disneyland. That's a no-brainer. But with them opening, so I mean, like within 3 months of each other, if you're somebody that's planning a vacation from like, I feel like the Midwest eastward, you don't want to just go for Galaxy's Edge. And if you can hold off 3 more months and go to Disney World, which offers more of a like complete vacation destination, I think a lot of people are going to do that.
So next news topic, I'm going to shift these around a little bit, and we'll do the depressing one first. Muppet Vision 3D has rolled out some new cast member costumes, but unfortunately, they've lost the area theming, and they have a more generic Hollywood Studios look to them.
That's not a good sign.
This is the beginning of the end, folks. I hate to say it. I love the Muppets. I love Muppet Vision 3D, but I feel like this is the start of it right here.
My biggest thing with Muppet Vision has always been like there's been so much confusion around what was going to happen to this part of the park for the longest time, because they started to revamp it, they did a little bit of work, and then it was like, oh well, now it's like right outside of Galaxy's Edge, and then there were rumors about how they would tie it into Galaxy's Edge and Grand Avenue, and now it's just looking like it's time. It looks like it's gonna go.
Yeah, and honestly, like it pains me to say this, but I don't think I want to see it tied in. You know, I don't think that would work.
Yeah, I think that would be weird, but it just kills me. It's so good.
Yeah. You just need to pick it up and move it. That's it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think in the Iger era of Disney, this is something that gets just bulldozed over, and there's no concern for like historical value behind the attraction or what it means to anyone.
No, but honestly, I think I would rather seen it just taken out if that's the eventual fate than seeing it like picked apart and die a slow death. You know?
Yeah.
I don't want to see it start going down to, you know, partial openings where it's closed off the majority of the year before they kill it. Just kill it if it's getting killed. I hate to see it go. I love it, but I don't want to see it turn out like some of the other attractions that they've done that with.
Where you just have to watch it suffer.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that makes me think about One Man's Dream.
Oh.
You mean Walt Disney Presents?
I will never call it that. It's my rebellion.
And then our last little bit of news here that doesn't really pertain to our park, but I thought it would be a nice little tie-in. It looks like annual pass holders are getting exclusive access to Guardians of the Galaxy Mission Breakout beginning August 25th. If you're a Disneyland annual pass holder, you can get an exclusive time to ride the attraction from, I believe it's 9 p.m. to 10 p.m., so there's like an extra hour window that it looks like it's going to be open for APs. All they have to do is show their annual pass to cast members at the attraction, and they get to take home a special lithograph while supplies last.
Why are they doing this? Does anyone have a theory?
I don't get it because it's not celebrating the opening of an attraction or a new Guardians movie coming out or seemingly anything.
Maybe this is just more tests to see if they want to put it in Disney World, in which case I will boycott.
Bum, bum, bum. I don't know. Like, part of me says it's probably in response to like I said, the whole blackouts with the APs. They're trying to give them more reason to be happy about an annual pass. Like, we've talked about this before, that the discounts and the perks for APs seem to be getting shorter and shorter, but the prices seem to be getting higher and higher. I think this might be that. Like, that might be part of it. I mean, the article also says the move to give annual pass holders exclusive time to ride the ride is just this in a series of latest perks rolled out this summer after annual pass holder attendance dropped Disneyland Resort after Galaxy's Edge opened, which, again, they blocked APs out of potentially their most exciting thing.
That just seems stupid. Like, I don't understand. Why would you punish your most loyal?
No, it's seriously, it's almost like they're trying to do this for making up for that and not having a pass holder preview at Disneyland, and then like dangling this very small carrot in front of them to bring them back.
Like, imagine if like hotels did this. Like, we know that you love to stay at the Hyatts, but because you love it so much, you can't stay at the ones in New York City or LA. Like, I don't understand.
Yeah. I have a theory, and I think you're probably going to agree with me. I think that when Galaxy's Edge was announced and they made the decision to not like to block out the APs during that time, they were thinking, oh, people will buy tickets anyway because they're going to want to see it when it first opens, and that didn't happen. So I think people got mad about the blackouts, which understandable. Like, you know, that park's highest like target audience is the local annual pass holder. Even if that's not what they want it to be, that's what it is. And they're not showing up to the parks, so Disney's got to do something to bring them back in. And it almost, to me, seems like a little bit of a salt in the wound type thing.
Mm-hmm.
So, that said, are you guys ready to dive into this week's e-ticket attraction, if you will?
Yeah.
And I just have to say, I feel really bad because Tower of Terror is my favorite ride, but I basically had done no research for this, so I'm just going to ask the questions and be like the audience member.
I don't think you're going to have to ask the questions. I know that you're such a big fan of this, you'll probably be able to throw some stuff in here.
Well, I hope so. I don't know. I can't remember my own name right now, so I'm having some major...
Let's get this out of the way right now. Kirsten, why is that?
Oh my god. Because on August 31st, I'm meeting Cher.
That's it. We've already had Country Bears and Cher, and we haven't even really started the episode.
No, you have no idea. Like, you know how you get an adrenaline rush, and then, like, afterwards you kind of feel jittery for a little bit?
This is how Brian feels whenever he goes into Country Bears.
Yeah. No, I feel like that all the time now. Like, I'm having some major problems in my life.
You're just excited. It's understandable.
I'm nervous. Nervous is the right word there. Anyway, so yeah, I'm just going to be the audience member because I might not even remember what Tower of Terror is by the end of this night.
All right, well, we'll teach you. So I guess I'll start off in the most obvious place for a history of Tower of Terror, which is going to be Epcot in the early 80s. So
yes, that totally makes sense.
So that might seem a bit ironic, but there actually is a little bit of history tied back to Epcot. So in the early 80s, specifically 1982, when Epcot opened, as we all know, the Imagineers really wanted to bring a World's Fair to a permanent location in Walt Disney World. And they wanted the park to focus on culture and technology that were found across the world, and basically make it as similar to a World's Fair from years past as possible. We talked about in other history episodes that, you know, Walt was very interested and even involved in a number of World's Fairs. So it was important to the Imagineers to kind of continue that with the park. And even though Epcot was initially successful in the first couple of years that it was open, the Disney company of a whole was not in really great shape at this point. The early and mid-'80s saw a number of nearly successful hostile takeovers of the company. At this time, the majority shareholders and basically heads of the company were Roy E. Disney and Sid Bass, and both of them feared that unless they really brought some major changes to the company as a whole, that one of these takeovers was eventually going to be successful. And that would most likely lead to the different segments of the Disney company being broken off and sold to different corporations. And more or less, this would have destroyed Disney as we know it, with different companies running different parks or being able to separate the studios from the parks, the merchandise, the television, all this stuff. It really wouldn't have been the same as the kind of all-encompassing media corporation that Walt started that we know it. So in 1984, the decision was made to bring in Michael Eisner as the CEO and replace the existing president, Ron Miller, with Frank Wells.
And Ron Miller was married to Diane Disney Miller, which was Walt and Roy's daughter, just so people know he was not just some random dude.
See, there you go. We're on like the third bullet point. And you're jumping in.
That's some Disney War stuff in there.
Mm-hmm.
So Eisner had made a name for himself as the head of Paramount Studios, and Bass and Disney were really hoping that he could come over and continue that same kind of success that he had had at Disney Studios. His style of running the company, though, was extremely different than what Disney had done in the past, and especially what Walt set up. Walt really liked to go all out on things and make the best movie or the best park or the best that he could do, and basically let Roy worry about the cost. Eisner had a very different approach that he referred to as shooting for singles and doubles as opposed to home runs. And this concept was basically the idea that, especially with the movie studios, that instead of spending a lot of money on A-list actors and directors for movies, that he would really focus on having a good plot and then bring either up-and-coming directors, or sometimes it was television actors or kind of washed-up actors that still had popular names to come in and star in the movies. And what this allowed him to do was keep the production costs of the movies very, very low, so that you would aim for moderate success, and then that way you didn't really worry about a movie flopping and you losing all this money that you'd spent during the production part of it. And occasionally, some of these movies would be bigger hits than they were initially planned to be, and then you've got really huge profit margins. So I know a lot of people dislike Eisner for that kind of philosophy because it was in such stark contrast to what Walt had done. But in a way, at this point in history with the Disney company, they were in such a fragile state that really, a couple of big movie flops would have made them so vulnerable to a buyout or a hostile takeover at that time. They really couldn't afford it. So even though he really kind of reshaped the Disney company in a way that a lot of Disney fans don't like, it's hard to say, but it's very possible that the Disney company would have been taken over if he hadn't stepped in and kind of pitched this new philosophy.
Which, it's hard to think about it now because Disney is so ginormous and they are so well respected and they're kind of the top of the top. But really back in that time, they were not doing great. I mean, it's
not at all.
Today,
yeah.
Just think Disney is the staple, media corporation.
Yeah, it's hard to even imagine that kind of world because it's so far from what we have today.
Right.
Just thinking about that, they were on the verge of a lot of corporate buyouts. That says a lot about where they were at.
So tying this back into Epcot during the mid-'80s, Imagineers were trying to come up with some new pavilions to add to Epcot to bring in some more guests. And one of the things they wanted to do was kind of go back to more of the World's Fair idea and give pavilions to different industries, which was, a really popular thing that the World's Fair had done to showcase the technologies. So the Imagineers started throwing these ideas around, and what they came up with was that it would actually be a pretty cool idea to have one that was centered on film production, since this was the industry that had given Disney its start. So Marty Sklar was the one who worked most on designing this pavilion, and what he came up with was essentially a kind of stripped down and shorter version of what the Great Movie Ride became. It was, a ride-through ride that took guests through a number of these different classic films. It wasn't, the same scale as to what the Great Movie Ride turned out to be, but it was a smaller version that had to fit in your standard Epcot pavilion. So they began working on this, but it was a pretty slow development process, and it didn't really pick up a whole lot of steam. But all that changed in 1986, which is when Universal Studios announced their plans to open a new theme park in Florida that was going to be based on their movie franchises and the production behind them.
This sounds so familiar.
So, Eisner and the Imagineers looked at this and said, maybe we should do something in direct response to this. And they decided to take this pavilion idea that Marty Sklar had been working on and expand it into its own separate theme park. And as I'm sure you can probably guess, this is what became MGM Studios. If you want to do a little bit of side history digging, there's a lot of legal issues that occurred at this point too, with some people accusing Eisner of having known about Universal Studios opening far ahead of time and using this knowledge to basically get a jump on them. But officially, no production on the actual park was made until Universal Studios had made the announcement. So maybe he had a bunch of stuff in his back pocket ready to go. Maybe he didn't. Don't really know, but
makes sense. Like, think about it with Universal just announcing the new park. Do we think Disney knew about that beforehand? Like, totally.
I mean,
I'm sure they had some idea.
Yeah. But apparently, what I saw that was accused of was that while Eisner was still working at Paramount, was that he had met with Universal and the discussion of this park had come up. So that Eisner had basically, taken information from another company and used it when he came to Disney, which is where the legal issues were.
I mean, it wouldn't surprise me because he's just like that.
So just like his plans for the Walt Disney Studios, Eisner's plan for the parks were going to be a lot different from what the company had done and seen before. Instead of creating this fantasy world that guests would become immersed in, Eisner wanted to pull back the curtain a little bit and kind of let guests get a look behind the magic in a sense and kind of see what was going on. So with this, the idea for MGM Studios took off, development continued, and it reached the final point where they decided that this would not only be a theme park that had attractions in it, but it would also operate as a television and film production studio and allow guests to see how some of that stuff worked. So Eisner, working really closely with Marty Sklar and another Imagineer, Randy Bright, really kicked the development of the park into overdrive. Universal, like I said, apparently had a massive head start on Disney, but MGM Studios actually opened before Universal Studios did. MGM opened in May of 1989, which was over a year before Universal Studios did. I still think that that's crazy. That, granted, it was a small theme park on opening day, right?
With 2 rides.
Yeah, yes. The only thing there when the park first opened was the Great Movie Ride, which was already kind of in development because Marty Sklar had been working on that for the Epcot Pavilion, and then the studio backlot tour. But I mean, there's still a lot of other stuff, like just the breaking ground, and I mean all the stuff you got hiring, the foundations for the buildings, the planning phases, the fact that even though it was only 2 rides, but an entire theme park to be opened up in 3 years
by
like
Disney,
start to finish. Yeah, that's a good point. Maybe another company wouldn't have an issue with that, but yeah, Disney generally takes their time with stuff.
To be fair, this is Eisner era Disney.
That's true, yes. We were hitting singles and doubles at this time, so it didn't necessarily matter if it was a home run. As long as it got built and was open and could make money, he was all for it. Um, so in May of 1989, Eisner welcomed his guests with the following speech. The world you have entered was created by the Walt Disney Company, and it's dedicated to Hollywood. Not a place on a map, but a state of mind that exists wherever people dream and wonder and imagine. A place where illusion and reality are fused by technological magic. We welcome you to a Hollywood that never was and always will be. And there's definitely hints of Walt in this speech, I feel like, and I respect that.
See, I think that he always, just from things that I've read in Disney more, I feel like he always wanted people to compare him to Walt, and so he did all these things, like whenever he would introduce the Disney movie, like every Sunday night or whatever, like they actually auditioned a ton of people, and he just said he didn't like any of them, so he ended up doing it himself. So I think he really envisioned himself as like a young Walt and was kind of like over the top about it. But, you know.
Yeah, I mean, in a way, like when I see videos of him, he obviously he had experience being the CEO of large corporations, but I don't think he was that like media ready personality that Walt was, and he tried to be that and wasn't necessarily that naturally.
Yeah.
Well, see, here's the thing. I think that with Eisner, he really did try, and in a place where the Disney company had just lost Walt and was really kind of struggling to find their way, he was a good step in that direction, because despite his shortcomings, he did always try to put himself in the front, and he did try to, like you said, make himself that media presence, and it's really easy to see that.
Mm-hmm.
Like, none of this stuff is stuff that you would ever see Iger doing at all.
No, probably not. Just, I mean, say what you will about Eisner, but he was willing to take risks and try stuff that hadn't been done before. I think Iger has shown very clearly that he follows a specific formula of what works, and that's what he's sticking to.
Mm-hmm.
But back to our history lesson. The park opened, and even though it only had 2 attractions at opening, and only a select few were added in the few years after opening, attendance numbers took off.
So it's like a lot like it is now. Nothing there, but still a ton of people.
Yeah. And in fact, it was a lot more attendance growth than the Imagineers were expecting. And just like we've seen in many other history lessons on this podcast, Imagineers knew that they were going to have to go to the drawing board and start looking towards expansion areas in the park. So with this, the Imagineers decided to continue with the theme of basing the areas of the parks on existing locations in Hollywood. They eventually came up with the idea to theme this new expansion around Sunset Boulevard, and the land was proposed to have a number of shops and restaurants really similar to what you would see on the actual Sunset Boulevard, but they wanted to have an e-ticket attraction at the end of the strip. So again, you know, just like how Walt kind of liked to use a weenie to pull guests into certain areas of the park, they wanted this e-ticket attraction to literally be at the end of this street so that guests would be pulled down it to go into the different shops and the different restaurants and stuff. This whole idea that Eisner was bringing with him, with, you know, changing things and doing things differently, with, you know, the financial monetary side of it, followed through in really a new image that he wanted to bring to the parks to it, and especially at MGM Studios. And it's very easily seen that he wanted to add attractions that were catered towards teenagers and adults. You know, obviously Disney has been a family-friendly theme park throughout its run, and, you know, a lot of the rides, some people would say, were more catered towards children. And Eisner wanted to get away from that. He thought that there was this, you know, large untapped market of teenagers and their parents that felt like they had outgrown Disney World, and he wanted to give them something to come and enjoy. So because they were doing the Sunset Boulevard expansion, he thought this would really be the perfect place to start implementing these more adult-oriented rides. So Eisner and the Imagineers went to work, and they quickly decided that they wanted this attraction, whatever it was to be based off of some classic horror medium. And they originally started with movies and started toying around with different ones and you know, what would serve as a good basis for the theming. And at first they wanted to do a show that was basically just inspired by one of these old movies, but that quickly got dropped, and they decided to go in favor of a ride, as Eisner thought that it would be more catering towards the adults and the teenagers like he wanted it to be. So with that decided, the team starts trying to narrow down what they're going to actually use as the plot line for this ride. And they really looked at a huge number of different things. You know, a number of the classic, you know, Frankenstein and other monster movies like that. But they also looked even into Stephen King's books as inspiration for it. And other things like a murder mystery type ride similar to the Clue movie. So they really kind of had, you know, all options open at this point. But what they eventually got to and really took a pretty long way into development was this concept that was going to be based off of Mel Brooks' Young Frankenstein that had come out in the 70s. And it, you know, it was a really popular movie. And they actually brought Mel Brooks in to, you know, serve on this team to help come up with the idea for the attraction. They did quickly decide, though, that the Young Frankenstein movie itself probably wouldn't be a great idea to use as the plot line for the ride, just because the setting of this old creepy castle really wouldn't make much sense at the end of Sunset Boulevard. But they still wanted Mel Brooks on the team and to do something with him. So they kind of took it in a little bit different direction, and they came up with this attraction that was called Hotel Mel, which I think is awful. But
can you repeat that again? I want to make sure that I heard that right.
the name of the attraction was Hotel Mel.
Okay, yeah,
As
that was
in
exactly
Mel
what I heard.
Brooks. Yes. Yeah, I don't know. I feel like that would have got scrapped just at the name pitch, but apparently this got really far into development. It was going to be a dark ride that was based in this old, creepy, abandoned hotel. Mel Brooks would narrate the whole thing. And essentially, it was the Haunted Mansion, but kind of more of a like comedic, satirical take on it. I'm, you know, seeing it, I'm kind of surprised that it got so far into development when Eisner was so adamant about having, you know, an adult, not necessarily adult oriented or themed, but a more, you know, adult and teenager appealing ride, because this really doesn't seem like it. But one of the other reasons that this really got scrapped was that after the plans were more or less drawn up, the Imagineers and Eisner kind of realized that this doesn't put guests into a specific movie, and it doesn't really give them a look at any of the production process. And because of that, it really doesn't fit in Hollywood studios' overall theming. And because, you know, this was early, or MGM Studios at the time, because this was so early in the park's history and there were so few rides, you know, they all really did fit that exact theme, and this wouldn't have been that at all. It's funny to think now because the theming seems so all over the place, but that was a main reason why this one got scrapped. Though Imagineers did love the creepy abandoned hotel concept, and they really wanted to keep that around as they further developed the ride. They thought that this facade that they had come up with the Hotel Mel ride really worked with Sunset Boulevard and acted in much the same way that Haunted Mansion did in Liberty Square, to kind of, you know, be that creepy old house at the end of the street that draws the visitors down. So, working through development, the team eventually landed on theming the ride after Rod Serling's The Twilight Zone. I want to ask, are y'all fans of The Twilight Zone outside of Tower of Terror?
I've watched a couple episodes, but I'm the biggest chicken in the universe, so it's kind of too scary for me, depending on the episode.
I've watched a few episodes, kind of similar to Kirsten.
But the Imagineers really picked The Twilight Zone for this because, it had become such a staple classic on television. Even though I didn't realize it only ran for like 5 or 6 years in the late 50s and early 60s. It
Wait,
seems,
really?
Yeah, it seems like one of those shows that was on for like decades, but it really wasn't. Aside from that, the series saw a slight boost in popularity with the early 80s Twilight Zone film that came out that kind of redid some of the old episodes in a, kind of a compilation format. But the Imagineers thought that this would be a really good way to bring this horror element to the park, to this ride. But because at this time, a lot of horror films were really like the slasher style horror films. They didn't really want the violence and gore that a lot of those movies portrayed. So they saw The Twilight Zone as a great way to bring that creepy horror feel to it, but also keeping it family friendly. So with the overall theme of the attraction, Disney decided to start working on what this ride was actually going to be. And what they reached was that they wanted this to be a drop ride. These types of rides started picking up popularity in the late 80s and 90s. And again, Eisner thought that making this a really thrilling ride would be a great way to pull in the older guests at the park. The Imagineers originally wanted to base this off of Free Fall, which for coaster and thrill ride fanatics will know this was like the OG drop ride, and it debuted at Six Flags Magic Mountain. And the way this worked was really, by today's standards, very basic. You had a elevator car essentially that you got strapped into that was raised up this curved path up to a vertical path, and it dropped you. And you rode down the rails, and it had brakes at the end of it, but that was essentially it. Like, you literally were picked up, you were dropped, and you got out of the car. And this seemed like the simplest approach that all the other theme parks were doing, so Imagineers first looked to this, but what they realized upon development was that as you make the ride taller, you have to increase the kind of like landing slope that this car goes down, and then that was going to take up a lot of space in the park as they planned to make this a very tall attraction. So they decided that they wanted to kind of look for a new ride system to get away from that, and also because of the kind of, just industrial type elevator pulley system and exposed, track and everything that all the other ones were using. They didn't think that this was going to be very good for setting up theming or actually building up a plot around this ride that they wanted to. So Disney developed what is probably, to this day, I would say, their most technologically advanced ride system ever. And this was the Autonomous Guided Vehicle System, or better known as AGVs. And what this technology allowed them to do was build a ride system that was based around a ride vehicle that they could do in pretty much any shape or form that they wanted to, that had a sensor on the bottom of it. And all they had to do was embed a wire into whatever path they wanted this vehicle to travel, embed it in the concrete, and with a little bit of coding, the vehicle simply followed where it sensed the wire in the ground. It allowed them to get away from having any kind of restraining rails, any kind of track system. It allowed them to do smaller, tighter turns. You could do basically a zero radius turn where the ride vehicle just pivots about its axis. So it was by today's standards, it even seems a little bit, old school, that it's just literally a wire that's laid into the concrete. But again, it was fairly simple, but allowed them to do really technologically progressive things with the system. So they had this AGV system that they've developed, but that really didn't help them in developing this drop ride that they were planning on doing. So they had to come up with a way to actually get this AGV into an elevator system to allow them to do the drops. So to help them out, the Imagineers went to the Otis Elevator Company, and they produced this system that allowed the autonomous vehicle to drive into essentially this elevator carrier, lock in place, and then the actual drop section of the ride kind of operated as its own system aside from the AGV. So another thing that really makes Tower of Terror so thrilling is that from a technical standpoint, it is not a drop ride. The ride does not drop you at all. The system that the Imagineers and Otis engineers develop has cables attached to both the top and the bottom of this elevator cart that the AGV hooks into. And during descents, you are not dropped. You are getting pulled down by the cable system, and that pulls you down faster than gravity would. And it's what makes the drops on Tower of Terror feel so weightless and more intense than standard drop rides.
And that's why it's the best.
Yes, most definitely. So at this point, the Imagineers have basically this ride figured out. A lot of technological work had to go into, a lot of engineering work, a lot of storytelling work had to go into it. But one of the last hiccups that they ran into was that they realized that the location of this attraction, because Epcot was so close to Hollywood Studios, was that they're about to put this almost 200-foot tall building up that is going to be located directly behind the Morocco Pavilion in Epcot. And if you look at Morocco across the World Showcase Lagoon, you are going to see this building. But with a little bit of clever Imagineering work, the Imagineers decided to do the exterior of the building in what they refer to as a Spanish colonial revival architecture. And it's cool because from, up close when you're in Hollywood Studios, it looks right at place in the Hollywood theming. But when you look at it from far away across the World Showcase Lagoon and look at Morocco, it looks like just another building that's in the pavilion skyline, and it looks like it has the same exact architecture style that the Morocco Pavilion has.
That's just one thing that is to me, that's just a perfect example of what good show means, and Disney's attention to detail, which is why they're still the best, is things like that. Because honestly, how many people actually notice that? Not many, but it's just kind of in your subconscious.
Mm-hmm. And that's one of those things too that you said, you can kind of see it from the right angle, but nobody's going to know that that's the Tower of Terror, because the way that they designed it is just perfectly thought out, that this needs to be covered from this angle so that people don't see that and say, oh, look, we're in approximation from Hollywood Studios.
Mm-hmm. So the final touch that the Imagineers wanted to do to the actual ride was to, really pay homage to Rod Serling, because he was what most people remembered from the Twilight Zone. Because it was an anthology type show, Serling was the only fixed point of that show that recurred week to week. So he was the show essentially. Fortunately, he passed away years and years before even the planning process for this ride began. But the team came up with this idea to take actual clips from the show with Rod in them and just have a voice actor dub over the lines that they wanted him to say. And they definitely wanted this to be as genuine as possible, and so they brought in Rod Serling's widow, Carol Serling, and she served as a consultant and helped them decide which actor, would really emulate Rod the best. And eventually they decided on Mark Silverman for the role, and he was the one whose voice was used in the very iconic pre-show or pre-ride scene. And also does the voice that you hear throughout the attraction. So, with that, we've pretty much come up to the attraction, and I'm sure a lot of Disney fans on here have done it, but we'll give a short little walkthrough for those that haven't.
Should we let Kirsten try to walk us through this?
Yeah, we can just scratch out this entire section of notes and just let Kirsten take it.
Really?
No, because you said your brain was so fried. I was like, maybe this would be fun.
You go up this hill and you pass this giant upside down car. No, anyway, I'm just kidding. And if you're lucky, the sign says there's a 13-minute wait.
I do love that touch. That is one that's, I don't think a lot of people realize, but I do love that one.
Yeah, me too. That's like my favorite thing, probably. Anyway,
Do
sorry.
we want to tell our listeners what that means?
Oh, that means there's no wait. If there's a 13-minute wait, it's basically walk on. You'll never see a 0 or a 5 or a 10-minute wait at Tower of Terror. It's 13 is basically, I think, as low as it goes.
Nice.
All right, well, I guess I'll take over the walkthrough then. Guests enter the ride through a queue that takes them through the grounds of the Hollywood Tower Hotel. And I love this because it just, I know I've said it on here before, but it does such a good job of building up the theme and building up the suspense of the attraction. Because as you start off in this little courtyard grounds area, like the closer you get to the hotel, like it just, you realize more and more that things are going awry, that this is not right. Something's wrong with this hotel. The walls start crumbling more, the sidewalk gets more cracked, and you eventually wind up in the hotel lobby and you realize that, nobody's been in this lobby for years, for decades, that there's cobwebs everywhere, it's dusty, and that there's like random pieces of paperwork or glasses and stuff that's left around that something happened that caused people to just leave the hotel. The other thing about this room that I really love is that if you're really, really into digging into minute details, you can go check out the little bulletin board directory that's on one of the walls near the elevators, and you get a nice little hidden message, and that's up for you to decide if it's a joke that the Imagineers put in, or maybe it's a benevolent spirit warning you about the future perils of the attraction. So from there, guests get split off into the 2 separate pre-show rooms. And this is the ones that we mentioned earlier, where the voiceover for Rod Serling is done. And it basically is a little mini Twilight Zone episode. And I love it because it's so accurate to the Twilight Zone. You have the nice voiceover at the beginning, you get walked through the plot of the ride, and then you have the creepy, leaves you thinking quote at the end of the pre-show ride to really get you amped up to go on it. From there, you're taken into the boiler room, and this serves as the final section of the queue, as well as the loading area for the attraction. So, once you get into the attraction, you start in this extremely complicated system that Disney developed for this ride. At this point, the AGV is locked into the first of 2 elevator carriers that are on the ride. Before I dig too far into this, I'm going to do my best to explain this in an audio-only format, but if this seems interesting, there is a YouTube video that came out, I think at the end of June. It was pretty recently, yeah. And it's by a channel called Art of Engineering. And they do a complete walkthrough of the different systems that make up Tower of Terror. And it is very, very in-depth. The whole video is, let's see, it's 18 minutes long. So they walk through the different systems, the different fail-safes, how a lot of the attraction was made, and how a lot of the effects that are done on it work. So if this sounds interesting to you, definitely go check out this video. It will probably help a lot to have visual aids as well.
I do have a fun fact about the lobby that I learned when I was working there. So in the Haunted Mansion also, and in Tower of Terror, they have all of those cobwebs, you know? Mm-hmm. And so there was originally one guy who was like the cobweb guy, and he made them all, and then he died, and nobody else knew how to do it like he did, and still to this day they don't have anybody who can do them as realistically. So if you look in Tower of Terror, in some places you can actually see the new ones that aren't quite as realistic looking, but most of them are still the old ones from whatever cobweb guy died with his secret. So it's kind of cool.
That's interesting. So once guests are in the AGV and they get into it as it's locked into this first elevator carrier. Essentially, the two different elevators that are used in this are almost like think of like an industrial elevator. Like it really is. It's a enclosed on four sides elevator cart that just has features that allows the AGV to lock into it. So you load onto this ride already locked into the first one, and it's just lifted up using just like a standard elevator cable system. So the doors open on a higher floor, which shows a window at the end of a long corridor, and the 5 missing passengers of the ill-fated elevator from the pre-show appear before the guests and then disappear with a burst of electricity. If you don't want to know how some of the stuff works, now's a good time to turn it off, because we'll kind of dig into a little bit of the magic behind it. But this effect is achieved using Pepper's Ghost, which is most famously seen in the Haunted Mansion ballroom scene. After that, the walls of the room slowly fade away, and the room turns into just a star-filled night sky with this floating window at the end of the corridor. And the way this works is actually pretty simple too, but again, the Imagineers have shown time and time again that simple effects done right work, and they stand the test of time. And they do this just by making all the walls in this room scrims, which is the very thin material that you can see through depending on how light is applied to it. So all they do is have the light shining on it so that you can't see through it, and then adjust the light so that you see through the scrims, and then behind them is just a number of fiber optic lights which make up the night sky. So again, very simple, but very effective.
Scrims are also in the Haunted Mansion. The largest scrim in the world is the cemetery scene at the Haunted Mansion.
Nice.
Look at that. You're contributing more than you thought you would.
Well, I only know that because of my Haunted Mansion tour, which I'm pretty sure I've said it on this podcast before, so it's just the same information.
That's going to become part of the bingo, too.
So after this scene, the elevator doors close and takes guests up to the next floor, which is the 5th dimension scene. And when the doors open, you're in another night-filled, starry sky. And here is where the AGV really gets to shine and show off its technology. So the AGV drives out of the elevator through this room, again, just following that wire that's been embedded into the floor. But this room features a number of the floating objects, which were very reminiscent of the intro to the original Twilight Zone show. And it eventually reaches the other side of the room where another set of doors open up. And here is where the vehicle locks into the second elevator shaft, which is the actual ride shaft. So in the original version of this attraction, guests loaded into this were taken all the way up to the top of the shaft. The windows opened briefly and allowed guests to look out over MGM Studios. and then the cable system yanked them back down 130 feet to the bottom of the elevator shaft. So upon the completion of the ride, the AGV backs out of the ride shaft, rotates 90 degrees, and this is where the unloading area of the ride is. So here you can see a number of props and Easter eggs from the original Twilight Zone series. But the coolest part about this section of the ride, which I didn't know until I did this research, was that the AGV runs off of battery power, because obviously it's not hooked up to anything, so it can't have any wires. And this is how it powers itself to move through the scenes where it's not on the elevator shafts. But anytime aside from the unloading area of the ride, the AGV is in motion if it's not in those elevator shafts. So they needed a way to charge the batteries for these things so that they didn't die halfway through the day with guests on the ride. So what they did was they actually built an inductive charging system into the base, or into the floor in the unloading area. So as this is the only time where the ride vehicle is stationary, it actually quickly charges the batteries a little bit every time that it's at the unloading area, and this allows them to run continuously without needing any other additional charging throughout the day.
Impressive.
So it's pretty neat. Wireless charging, not just for your phones.
Seriously, they had that technology. Like, I can't even keep my phone charged all day.
Same.
So after this, the guests get off, exit the gift shop, and the AGV continues down the same corridor, which puts it back to the original elevator shaft, and this is where it's ready to load up new passengers. So it's pretty cool. And again, if you go and watch that video that I described, schematically it's a lot easier to understand, but it's cool because the elevator basically makes a complete loop around this system and ends up back in the same place. And as we'll kind of get into a little bit later with the other iterations of this ride that don't use the AGV system, Tower of Terror is able to be, or the Hollywood Studios version of Tower of Terror is able to be really efficient at loading guests because it has these two separate areas for loading and unloading, whereas like at California Adventure, loading and unloading is done at the same location. So Twilight Zone Tower of Terror opened its elevator doors on July 22nd of 1994, and pretty much immediately the ride was a huge success, and it really showed that Eisner's demand for these more adult-oriented rides were going to work. And not only that they could do them, but also still keep the theming that Disney was known for and not let that suffer just because you were going after these more, adult-themed thrill rides. And over the years, the Florida version of the ride has not seen much change. The two major changes have really just come in the drop system, and not even really the system itself, but just the parameters that they put into it. In 96, the system got changed to where you drop twice instead of once. And then in 2004, for the 10th anniversary, they implemented this randomized drop sequence, which I believe there's like, I don't know how many different profiles they have, but each one will get you between 5 to 8 drops. And you don't know which one it's going to be when you get on. And it's pretty cool. They do make sure, though, that for each profile, no matter what, you get one faux drop where it does the little stutter, like it acts like it's going to drop you and holds you there for a minute to build suspense and then drop you. And then it has one drop that always goes all the way to the top and then drops you 130 feet all the way down to the bottom.
Does anybody have a favorite drop sequence?
Ooh, I love the one that... Are you doing like an overall drop sequence or just like a portion?
Either.
I love the one where it boosts you up and it doesn't like stop at the top and it just immediately pulls you right back down.
Yeah, I love the drop sequence where you start by going up. That's my favorite one.
That's a good one. I don't have a favorite sequence, but I think the best drop is when you go up and you can like kind of see the doors open.
But not
like,
all the way.
Not enough that like you can actually see out, because everybody in the car that hasn't been on there starts to freak out, and then you drop.
So that's pretty much it for Disney World's Tower of Terror, but as big Disney fans will know, that is not the only iteration of the ride. So the next part of our story takes us out west near the turn of the new millennium, where Disney is finalizing plans for Anaheim's second park, Disney's California Adventure. And this is going to be kind of funny and ironic, but Eisner and the Imagineers were kind of worried at this point that when they opened California Adventure, that it was going to kind of cannibalize the popularity of Disneyland and pull too many guests away from it. So, so because of this, Eisner and the Imagineers started looking at a way to bring a new thrill ride to Disneyland, so that shortly after the opening of DCA, they would be able to announce this new ride and draw in some of those crowds back and kind of even out the attendance numbers. Because Tower of Terror had been on this crazy successful run, they thought that that'd be a great place to start looking at inspiration for a new ride. They liked the drop ride. That was obviously popular not only at the Disney parks but at other theme parks, so they thought that they would continue that and put something like that in Disneyland. Unfortunately, Twilight Zone was not a very good theming point to put anywhere in Disneyland, so they had to kind of take it and tweak it a little bit. And what they came up with was an attraction that was called Geyser Mountain, and they were going to put it in Frontierland. Basically, it was this this mine elevator that was meant to just go up and give guests an overlook of the surrounding area, and then take them down to this mine. But unfortunately, a geyser goes off, which propels the elevator back up to the top, and then drops guests all the way back down to the bottom. So this was the proposed ride, and development got a pretty long ways into this ride, and they were basically ready to pull the trigger as soon as DCA opened up. But unfortunately, when California Adventure opened in 2001, Disney quickly realized that their fears of the new park cannibalizing attendance were completely unfounded. During the first year of operation, California Adventure saw less than half the number of guests that Disneyland did, which was in stark contrast to what the Imagineers and company thought were going to happen. So the Imagineers realized that it wasn't Disneyland that was going to need an exciting new attraction to draw in guests, but the brand new park, DCA. It's very unfortunate. And on the silver lining of this whole situation, though, is that because they now decided that they need to put this attraction into Disney's California Adventure, obviously the Geyser Mountain theming was scrapped, and it was going to be much easier to just basically bring in another version of Tower of Terror into the park. And that's exactly what they did. They kept the overall theme of the MGM Studios version of the attraction, but they did implement a simplified ride system that did not use the AVG technology. And aside from that, they used they refer to as a Pueblo Deco style for the exterior architecture, which fit in a little bit better with the slightly more modern Hollywood theming that they were using in Anaheim at this time. But more or less, the plot and the theme of the ride were unchanged. This version of the attraction opened up in 2003, and just like Disney World's version, it was immediately successful. In the year after it opened, California Adventure saw a 9% attendance growth, and analysts believe that this was really almost completely due to the new Tower of Terror attraction. It was far and above the most popular attraction at the park in the first couple of years after it opened. So as Disney normally does with its hyper successful attractions, they decided to try to work these ideas into all of their other parks across the globe. In 2005, Disneyland Paris opened up its version of the ride, and it was almost exactly the same as the California Adventure one. It did not use the AVG technology, it used the more simplified one. And other than that, they really just used a different architectural style on the exterior of the ride. If you look at both of the rides, you can see that they used the very unique DCA structure of the ride with the drop shafts and the little overhanging rooms at the top on each side. It's very easily noticeable if you look at pictures of it. But so that version of the ride opened in 2007, and it is still there to this day, relatively unchanged. As usual, though, Tokyo Disney Sea gets the cool one. It got its own version of Tower of Terror, which opened up in 2006, which was very, very different from all the other iterations of the ride. It obviously retained the drop element, which is what made it a Tower of Terror. But other than that, none of the theming was the same, and that was because Twilight Zone was pretty much unknown to most people in Japan. So the Imagineers took this opportunity to develop their own storyline, and what I think is really cool that I always love about classic Disney attractions is they come up with a completely original storyline, which is what they did for this one, which is centered around Hotel Hightower, and to give it even more cool points, it has ties to the Society of Adventurers and Explorers, which we all love on this podcast.
Which, if you go back to our episode on that, we talked in great detail about this attraction.
Mm-hmm. So, and it's very cool. It reminds me a lot of the plot line of Mystic Manor, which was, as we know, the Haunted Mansion, yeah, that, is so different from the other versions. But it uses a very similar plot line about an explorer that kind of finds a mystical object, which makes in this case it's a hotel instead of his house, but kind of makes the house or the building that he's in act haywire. So it's pretty cool. But a lot of this was actually inspired by Joe Rohde's travels around the globe, which I thought was really cool. I don't think he actually found a mystical object that made his house go awry, but he did have some input on the different cultures that he was able to visit. So for the sad part of this, as we all know, we had to get to the DCA version of Tower of Terror operated pretty much completely unchanged from its opening in 2003 until 2017. In 2014, the hit movie Guardians of the Galaxy premiered and was a huge box office success, made over $700 million during its run, so Iger had to jump on that and throw that IP in there somewhere. So shortly after the announcement was made that a sequel was coming out for the movie, Disney announced that a Guardians ride would be coming to California Adventure. However, that quickly turned into negative news when it was announced that this was just going to be an overlay on Tower of Terror. So on January 2nd of 2017, the California Adventure Tower of Terror took its final drop, and construction began shortly afterwards to convert the hotel's exterior to that of the Collector's Fortress from the Guardians movie. Only 4 months later, the ride opened as Guardians of the Galaxy Mission Breakout. And this ride is mechanically almost exactly the same as it was before the overlay. The only major thing that they changed was that they incorporated a randomized drop sequence with this, because it originally was on a set drop profile before. But when you get on the ride, the doors will open intermittently, and it shows videos on a screen of the different Guardians characters trying to break out of this fortress. It incorporates a lot of the music that was, really popular from the Guardians movie. But yeah, I know not a lot of people were very happy about this.
Yep.
Yeah, I don't know. I've heard a lot of people say that, California Adventures Tower of Terror didn't have the same following that Disney World did, but I don't know. It's such a obvious cash grab that it just, like, I've never even been to Disneyland or California Adventures, but it just kind of left a bad taste in my mouth that Disney would do this.
I've heard a lot of people really like it, though, which, I mean, I guess more power to you if you do. I wish that I could actually see this for myself before I make a judgment.
I just don't like it because it makes me worry that if people like it there, then they'll be more willing to change it at Disney World.
Well, that brings me to a question that I was gonna say for the end, but here's a good time to ask it. How would you feel about an overlay coming to the Hollywood Studios version of the ride? And I know the answer to this already, but follow-up question that ignores that. Are there any IPs that you would see as fitting for the attraction?
I don't see anything specific that I can think is going to be fitting for it. I also don't know if I could see anything being an overlay for it, which is weird, but I think I've said this before, Hollywood Studios has no vision or direction, and that last little chunk of property in that park is the only thing that they haven't touched in a while.
Yeah.
I can't think of anything that would be an appropriate replacement. It's just too... I just feel like they really hit the jackpot. Like, the theming, the atmosphere, I mean, it's perfect.
Mm-hmm.
Like, why would you mess with something that is perfect, that's that old, that consistently has lines that long? I mean...
Kirsten, this is Disney we're talking about.
I know. I just don't understand. Like, there's so many other things that you need to be spending money on to, and bringing up to par. Like, don't touch something that is perfect the way it is.
Yeah, I agree. And the thing that really killed me too when I was looking at the California Adventure version of this, like, the ride is located in a section of the park called Hollywoodland. Nothing about Guardians of the Galaxy fits in that theming whatsoever.
If they did it, I would want it to be completely, not IP, just completely new, blue sky, something new. Because that's, I think, sometimes when they're most successful is when they don't use IP. Like, I mean, Haunted Mansion, Pirates of the Caribbean, like, so many classics did not come from IP. And I think that they should get back to that because that's where they can really shine and do something really different. Rather than, like, here's another ride based on a movie.
Yeah, I just think we're so far removed from that because the last, like, blue sky attraction was probably Soarin'.
Yeah.
And it's just, to me, feels like now we're in, at least, I know it's kind of tired of me saying this, is like in the Iger era of Disney, everything is so heavily based on IP. I think that, at this point, what else can they really do? Like, they're not going to come up with a new attraction in his last couple years. I think it's going to take us getting a new person in that seat and getting some shuffle around to actually see anything new come out of Disney.
Well, then I hope they leave it alone until he leaves.
But to tie this back around, I know, like, we've gone on a while about this. I'm pretty sure Hollywoodland in DCA is supposed to be getting turned into the Marvel section, isn't it?
If that's true, then that would help I guess it'd certainly make it fit into the new theming. I always thought that was kind of weird though, just in and of itself, that like, I don't know, like there's a Hollywood land and a California theme park. Like you would think that guests would just want to go to Hollywood if they wanted like that.
You're also talking about a park in California that's themed to California.
That's true, but at least like the other sections of the park are kind of like, let's look at California's natural beauty and the things that it has to offer. I guess, okay, that's still the same point. They could just go out in the natural beauty of the state. Well, I'll wrap this up by saying that over the 25-year run that the Tower of Terror had, has consistently served as an e-ticket attraction at any of the parks that it was brought into. And its success proved that Disney could, in fact, produce a high-quality, truly thrilling ride that still maintained the in-depth theming that the parks were known for. And while Eisner's approach to the company as a whole was seen as a step backwards for many die-hard Disney fans, his approach led to a number of unique Disney attractions, of them Tower of Terror undoubtedly the most successful.
I will give him props for that.
Yes, like, he took a couple of really, really, really weird shots at stuff, and some of them did not work, but Tower of Terror worked extremely well.
Then that's going to do it for us this week. Thanks for joining us again on another episode of the Station 71 podcast. If you like what you heard, be sure to subscribe to us on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts from. If you want to be a part of the show, reach out to us on our website at www.station71podcast.com, where you can find links to all of our social media, our email address, and our brand new Google Voice line where you can leave us a voice message. Have anything you want to hear us talk about? We'd be happy to discuss that on the next episode. We hope you enjoyed your ride, and we'll see you real soon.
Please stand clear of the doors. Por favor, manténganse alejado de las puertas.